Hey there, my friends. I have a little video that I'm going to do right now, and one of the things that we're doing for folks who are reading my book is that there's a Facebook group, so it's sort of like a study group for folks who are working their way through the book. One of the things I promised in making that group was that I would do some sort of exclusive videos for the folks in that group based on questions they had about the book, etc. I'm going to post the first one of those publicly, but the rest will be just accessible in that group. And I'm posting the first one publicly just as a little, seductive draw for anyone who hasn't yet, joined us in the club. So I figured I would do this one and just show you the kind of additional stuff that you'll get once you join us on the Facebook group. And again, to join the Facebook group, all you have to do is have the book and answer a question based on it, and you can come work with those of us that are in there now, chatting already. So this is going to be a conversation about the courts and relationship readings, and this was a request from Nancy. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about how I work with the courts and relationships, in relationship readings, how you might want to... I've got a short stack of cards here. So what I did was I pulled out all the court cards and just a handful of other parts of the deck. And I'm going to do just a couple examples in terms of how the court cards can work together in a relationship reading. I'm going to slide this over a skosh. In a relationship reading, and how you might know who's who and how they're interacting with one another. All right, so I'm using this giant deck, which is one of my favorites, and I don't really use it that much because of the size, but I figured actually this would be nice because I would be able to sort of see all 9 cards at once, but also not have to zoom in. So with with pip decks, I generally do use reversals, and particularly when I'm looking at a relationship reading, I do use reversals for the courts because this is a pretty simple technique, but I just sort of said I need a way to know who's who when I have courts in a reading. So I need to know if it's the person I'm reading for, and if that person I'm reading for is me, then I need to know if it's me, and if it's someone else in my life, I need to know that. Whoops. It's hard shuffling. So the thing that I decided ages ago, and by ages I mean in the last 6 months as I was working on this course, is that if a court card was reversed, it represented the person I was reading for, the querent, the person who the reading is about, whether that's me or I'm reading for someone else. And if it was upright, then it represented someone in their life. Now, the nice thing about a relationship reading is that you know who that other person theoretically is. And that's an easy thing about it, is that, relationships are about 2 people, theoretically. And so that makes it easy to see who the courts represent. Watch this. I'm not going to get any court cards, am I? Oh, there we go. All right, so I have an upright Knight of Cups here. So this is the not the person I'm reading for, it's someone else. And if I don't get enough, yeah, I have like no court cards so far. Ironic, right? So I'll replace, I'm going to replace, let's see, this card with a court, because when we're practicing things, we can do it. I obviously chose too many other cards. All right, so we'll use the reversed Knight, or rather Page of Swords. All right, so we still can't quite see this. All right, the images don't super matter anyway in this activity, in this moment. But this is a nice, easy spread. This is my go-to for almost everything. It's a 9-card reading, and the way that I read this is I will look at the center of the reading. This is the first card that goes down, and I pair it with the upper left, the second card that goes down, and everything else goes around it. This is a pretty usual Lenormand technique, but I find that it works well for readings. So I want to look at a couple examples. Let's say that this is one example where I have a client who wants to know, it's the beginning of a relationship. I just met so and so. What's the potential for this relationship? Now, there are interesting things to consider, right? Because most of the time when we are shuffling and drawing, we're not guaranteed. In fact, in this case was an example where I only got one court card. And so if I only got one court card in the or no court card in the readings, that would affect how I think about it, right? But if I got one court card, that would tell me something interesting about a partnership or a lack of a lack of a partnership. Now I'm going to get the hiccups. But in this case, in this situation, we've got two. All right. And so this is a pretty simple scenario because I asked a relationship question. I've got one upright court card, which is the Knight of Cups, and then I've got one inverted court card, which is the Page of Swords. And so I know the Knight of Cups is this person's new love interest, and I know that the Page of Swords is the person I'm reading for, simply because of the way they landed. Now, we'll talk about other things, if I got multiple court cards, I'll talk about that too. But for the moment, let's just look at this first easy situation, right? So I'm looking for what's the potential of this relationship, and I go in and I start doing, a fairly straightforward reading. Now, I'm not going to worry about reversals for the other cards in this example, just because I do use them with Marseille or Pip style decks, but in this case, this deck hasn't been marked, and you kind of do need to mark a Marseille deck in particular when working with reversals, because you can't see for the most part. So let me just go through and I'll sort of talk about how I would do like a basic relationship reading here, thinking about just the courts and the relationship. And this is a simple one. So we've got the Two of Wands in the middle. That suggests a nice growing passion. But what is curious to me, and this happens a lot in relationship readings, is that it's partnered with the Wheel of Fortune. It's like a reminder of like, yes, passion's growing, but things change, right? So we have to be aware of how like at the beginning of a relationship, it's really sexy and really hot. And the Two of Wands there is it's a pretty sort of like sexy card in its way, because it's like the smashing together of passions, right? But things aren't always that way. Right now it's on the upswing. So there's potential there, it seems like, as long as we're aware of how the fact that it's not always going to be hot and heavy, which people at the beginning of relationships 90% of the time forget. So I look at that for my theme, and now what I do is I go through in any normal reading and I look at the rows and columns and I explore that. But the next thing I actually want to do, focusing specifically on a relationship, is I want to look at the court cards and I want to look at where they're looking, and I want to know a little bit about what's around them, because those cards are going to be influential. So the person that we're seeing right now, the person that's this client's new love interest, is the Knight of Cups. And the Knight of Cups is sort of your romantic hero in a way. Now, this is a fake situation. I don't know the genders of either of these people. I'll just make them up. But it doesn't matter. I don't read court cards almost ever with gender, for obvious reasons. Because it just allows me to have more flexibility with them. So let's say this client is a woman. The client is seeing another woman. Despite that, I still look at the Knight of Cups rather, as the other person in the relationship. And so now I'm kind of faced with an interesting thing, right? Because the Knight of Cups is a curious character. The Knight of Cups is the embodiment of romance. He's and I'm using the gender pronoun here just of the character in the card. But if this were another reading, if this were a real reading, I'd try to be more thoughtful about that. He's going off in search of love, essentially. He's going off in search of feeling and emotion. So, you definitely get, the romantic hero there. but I see this person sort of grounded nicely between coins and swords here. So like if I just look at this foursome of cards, this is a practical person because I've got the nine of wands there, and I'm sorry, gosh, the nine of coins there. So I know that they're hardworking, and I know that they're practical, and I also know that they're thoughtful, and they're not just interested in the physical or the emotional; they're interested in the mind. So that's a good thing, and of course they're connected to the central card of growing passion. That's a nice thing. What's also nice to me is that I look at a link here between the Knight of Cups sitting on top of the Three of Swords, and my querent is represented by a Page of Swords. So that's a good thing. And I can tell that this person is kind of an intellectual because, of course, they're a swords card, but they are also crowned in a sense by the Ace of Swords. So they are definitely a little bit more heady than the Knight of Cups is, but the Ace of Wands right here suggests kind of an awakening passion. And again, we've got the Two of Wands here. I'm sorry if I'm mixing up the suits. I'm trying very hard. It's been a very long day. We've got the Two of Wands here and the Ace of Wands here, which suggests kind of an awakening passion. So I feel like just looking at these things without even looking at the meanings of the cards and looking at the meanings of the courts, I feel like the potential that I saw initially continues to be a positive piece of potential. It's there's a compatibility, even though the air even though the air of the Page of Cups is not super emotional, even though this person seems to live in their head a little bit. They're sort of feeling more passionate than they're used to, and where the Knight of Cups can be sort of wandery and difficult to pin down, there's a practicality and also an interest in expanding intellectualism in that regard too. So there's like a nice simpatico there. Now I could look at the courts to sort of indicate just a little bit more about the personality of each of these people, their experience level. This to me, I would say, represents my client probably being someone who isn't super used to being in relationships. Uh, Pages, I always think of it as students or learners. They are not this person that I'm reading for is not overly romantic and is probably not taken in by romance because it's more about logic for them. It's more about what swords represents. It's more about thinking and about making sense of things. And again, they're sort of crowned by the Ace of Swords, so that reinforces that concept to me. But there's definitely an attraction, so that's a good sign too. Now, the Knight of Cups, we know can be very fluid and very romantic and very given to wander. So that's something that's concerning. But what's a nice thing is that the page down here, sorry, the page down here and the knight up there, there's something that this person who loves learning can learn about relationships from someone who's more experienced in them, right? Because the knight suggests a little bit more experience. And I think when it comes to relationships, the Knight of Cups is about as experienced as a knight gets when it comes to relationships. So again, there's a simpatico, but I get a sense of who they are. I get a sense that this Knight of Cups again is a little bit more practical, especially riding toward the Nine of Coins, which is really about really pushing towards work, responsibility. So nines represent like the final push towards the effort to get to the finish line. The effort that goes into it. It builds on the eight. Eight is about hard work and sustained effort. The nine is like the real push to get it done. So this may be something that they've long been thinking about. This Knight of Cups here, likely they're on the verge of becoming the Queen of Cups in a way, sort of ascending, ascending the ladder in terms of experience. That's a good sign too, because they're willing to do responsible work, even though that responsible work can be hard and it makes you want to give up on it. Because there's an energy to me in nines of wanting to give up on the work because it feels like you can't get there. But the way that the knight is riding toward it, it's like, I'm gonna do this work. So there's a recognition in this somewhat wandery romantic Knight of Cups, who may have been like a wanderer in the past, to really be, is really feeling dedicated to the effort, and dedicated to the work that needs to get done to make a relationship sustain itself, to bring it to fruition, which the 10 would do. So that's a nice sign too. So again, I get more validation just in exploring who this person is, from a perspective of whether there's compatibility there, whether there's potential there. It also suggests, with sort of sitting on the Three of Swords, that they're learning a lot from this person. This person likes learning. This person is a student and a student of the world, and they like discovering new things. This Page of Cups here, and is really turned on, in a sense, if I combine these two things together, really turned on by smart people. And so this person is sort of learning about maybe like the power of a growing intellect, and they're just learning. She's learning from her, from my client in this case. All of that suggests good things. So I have a better sense of who they are. If this client were sitting next to me, this would give me an opportunity to validate whether, I'm describing someone that she recognizes. If she says that's not me, that, I have to do a little work there. And if she says that's not who this person is, then I have to sort of reconsider. But, again, I talk about this a lot. Just because someone says, oh, that's not me, doesn't mean it's not. It means they don't recognize themselves that way. But it's rare that I've found people sort of say, oh, no, I'm not like that at all, honestly. So there's a lot of potential here, and I think that that's good. Are there warning signs to me? Yes and no. One warning sign that I have to sort of note as a reader is that while the Knight of Cups is pushing toward this Nine of Coins energy, the Wheel of Fortune is right there, which means that underneath that effort, that sustained effort, they are given to change. They're given to roam. And so they're going to need to kind of keep things circling around them. They're going to need to kind of keep things fresh. And so, if I sort of explore this in this regard, it's the thing between them. If I sort of look at this, it's connecting them. So this person is really going to need to think about new ways to keep this person's interest, because this person, despite being willing to do the effort, can lose interest really quickly. But with that said, the reading ends with the 10 of Coins. So there's something really fascinating too, right? We go from the 9 to the 10. So the work gets done. So it seems like the potential is actually really strong, because this work that I suggested this person's willing to do comes to fruition as the final card in the reading. So that feels like a really nice sign. It's also a nice sign to me that it's not a Cups card. It's a card of duty and responsibility and realistic expectations. So, and again, that meets them both. They both meet in the middle over doing the work, coming to fruition over practical, realistic expectations, bringing the realistic part of a relationship to fruition. Again, that's like a really nice sign. So good, good for us. In essence, I don't even need to read the rest of the reading, because I've touched on all the cards, and I didn't even need the columns and rows in any sort of normal way for myself. Working with the court cards as focal points gave me, a fairly strong answer. I feel like it's hard to refute. Yes, there's potential. Yes, there's a little bit of things you have to think about in terms of how, your partner's going to need to keep things fresh because they're easily distracted. And they can change, they can be pretty changeable, but the work that they're willing to do kind of brings you both towards the effort of that work. Now, I'll pause for a second and say, again, this is an imaginary reading. I'm not using all the nuances that I would necessarily do. One of the reasons why I like to use reversals with pip decks is because if this card were reversed, then I would say that potential was actually really on shaky ground, because I would say that the practical reality would end the relationship. You know what I mean? Like, this would be in shadow. It would be like the work was just too much and it didn't get done, or the need to get to that final point just never, it blocked these two. So, but that's just a nuance that I enjoy and that I think is useful. But I think that if this had been reversed, I would have been sort of less confident that the long term potential was there. But using without that, and just going with it, this is the next step from this is the next step from this. So we get a growth, and there is a sense of growth here. It starts with expansion. It starts with two things coming together, growth. I mean, we have these two aces. Everything's sort of growing and pushing, and there's a very explosive energy to those things. Aces are beginnings, and there's like this crash of together of like passion and thought. And I think it's just one of those things where we realize that what's in our minds can be really sexy, and the way we communicate with each other can be. But as a reader, again, I'm happy that there's all that passion, but I'm happy it's grounded in some really strong earth cards. So if I felt like I needed to, and I actually really don't with this reading, I would go down and say, the Wheel of Fortune and the Ace of Wands and the Page of Wands, probably makes me feel like this person is changing to a new way of thinking. So this relationship has changed the way that this person views relationships. But also recognizes that things change, you know what I mean? And so I think this person is very aware that the passion that they feel that's new and growing doesn't always stay that way. Relationships do have cycles. If I were to look at the middle column here, the Nine of Coins, the Two of Wands, the Ace of Wands, there's an interesting sort of diminishment there if we were to look at it in terms of numbers. But actually, it's like this passion, this growing passion, sort of resolves itself in effort. So I don't think either one of these folks takes for granted the work that goes into a relationship. So despite the Knight of Cups being kind of a dewy-eyed romantic, that's not a quality that I would have to worry about with this pairing. Again, we have the Knight of Cups really expanding her thinking, and it's going to bring her to the place where she can do that work that we talked about. I didn't really talk about the rows either. I did talk about this row. The mind is expanding here. I think both of their minds are expanding as a result of this relationship. So there's a lot of growth. We go from Ace to 3. So that's a nice expansion of like opening minds there. The Page is really looking at this Ace of Wands and is sort of seeing passion for the first time, really, and recognizes that it's an effort, but that it's a worthwhile effort. Like it's not just a sexy weekend. It's there's a duty and a responsibility there that they feel. So, looking at a relationship reading in that way, this is kind of an easy one, but it's nice when two cards come up and one's reversed and one's upright. Gosh, my language just leaves me at a certain point during the day after I've been talking. Now let's make this slightly more complicated. So let's say that I have this reading and I've got the Page of Swords upright now. Everything else stays the same. What I see is one of two different things. Either I have a person who is torn between two different people, or I have someone who has, these two court cards represent different aspects of their partner. Part of that is going to have to be affected by the question, right? The question that I was asked was, what's the potential in this relationship? I would have to use the context of the question and the context of the cards to figure out whether the Page of Swords is someone else, like a third person that they're still having feelings for, or whether it's just another aspect of the Knight of Cups there at the top. How do I do that? Well, I have to start exploring what's going on. Now, most of the time, when I get a question like, what's the potential of this relationship, I I need to, right, because possibilities can be endless with reading. So I need to rein in the possibilities. And one way that I can rein in the possibilities is literally by saying that I'm looking only at this relationship. The question was, what's the what's the potential for this relationship? So I'm not looking at other relationships that may be affecting the the overall thing. I'm just looking at the parameters of this one. So that's one thing I could do, is look at the way the question was worded and give myself parameters and boundaries in doing that, and the wording of the question was, what's the potential of this relationship? That's one thing. So I could say, well, the rule is, because the question was about one relationship, I can only look at this person and the other person, and in that regard, this has to be two sides of the same person. I could also look to the central card of the reading, which creates this um, kind of barrier in essence. Like, there's this expansion, this passion expanding, but there's a duality with the twos. So there's like and then in this reading, the way that it goes, like, there's a butting up there. So in this case, I could actually see that this is a crossroads, literally, you know what I mean? And so they are choosing between two different people. How do I know that? Honestly, I have to trust my gut. Another thing I could do is ask, I mean, if they're with me, I could say, hey, I just want to make sure that I'm going down this road. I see this card here. It suggests a crossroads to me. Are you at a point where you have to choose between two people? And if that's the case, then I can go down that road. But I have to remember the question I was asked, right? The cards always answer the question we were asked. The question we were asked was, what's the potential of this relationship? I need to answer that question because that's what these cards are focusing on. The question wasn't, I'm at a crossroads, who do I choose? So what I have to do to narrow things down further, if I decide that these are two different other people, I have to figure out how this person is affecting the potential for the relationship that we're talking about. So I need to know which of these two people is the person they're asking me about. So again, in that case, I need to ask more questions. So you can see, you can go a lot of different ways, but you can start getting really complicated. You know what I mean? You can start getting like way too deep. So I like to choose the simple over the complicated when I'm reading, because there's so much possibility anyway. So I don't always succeed, but I try a lot of the time to say, what is the question and what was the exact wording we agreed on? And when the question was, what is the potential for this relationship? Then I'm looking at the connection between these two people. And I would have to be asked a different question, which person should I choose? Then I would have to approach it differently. Do you see what I mean? Like, it's a subtle difference, but the cards always answer the question we're asked, as Camellia Elias says, and I'm a strong believer in that. And I'm a strong believer in, like, checking my interpretation against the question. If I start going down this crossroads path here, and I'm like, well, you've got this person and this person, I'm not answering the question until I reconfigure the reading to answer what was asked, which is, what's the potential for this relationship? Now, the potential for this relationship could be damaged somewhat if this is another person, right? But I need to focus on that. So if I know there's a third person in the reading, I still have to answer, what is the potential for this relationship? And this relationship will be affected by this person. So that's one thing. Now, a slightly easier path than that is if they're both reversed, in which case that suggests to me that they're both the person I'm reading for. And that paints an interesting picture too, because here I have a tarot reading about what's the potential for this relationship, and the other person doesn't show up in it. So I start asking myself questions based on the context of the cards. Is this person too self-centered to see the duality of a relationship? No, because I got a card in the middle with duality, right? So that's a good sign, unless this was reversed, in which case I would say, yeah, they're not seeing that a relationship is part of duality. So this is an interesting thing. Looking at the context always helps me understand what I'm learning about this person, what I'm learning about the reading. Like doing a reading is like research. And you have to sort of like come up with a thesis and then research the cards to tell you what. So I have a relationship. Let's say this was reversed. Both of the court cards are reversed. That means I'm only looking at the person who I'm reading for, and they're not seeing duality. So they're asking me, what's the potential for this relationship? Right out of the gate, I'm like, you only see the relationship in context of what you want. You're super romantic and you're super inexperienced, and you're only thinking about how it affects you. And that to me, right out of the gate, says there's limited potential. Partnered with the Wheel of Fortune there at the top, again, I'm like, the tide could be turning on it. Now I've got aces here and I've got the 9 and the 10, so that may make me feel more confident. Like, you're learning stuff, you're learning what passion means, you're learning how to think about relationships, you're gonna do the work you need to do. So as long as that happens, then there's potential. But do you see what I mean? Like how little shifts like that and just looking at context and the coloring of the cards affects a relationship in an interesting way, or reflects the court cards in a reading in an interesting way. So like another scenario is that we get other court cards. No, that's the Magician. Where are my damn quotes? Nope. All right, here we go. So we get the Page of Wands into the mix. All right, so let's go back to my original position, with this being the person I'm reading for. Now I have the the Knight of Cups, and now I have the Page of Wands. So here's another interesting scenario, right? Like, again, am I looking at this third court card as representing a third person who's coming into the mix? I could do that. But again, as I said, I tend to favor simplicity over complexity when reading, because even in just these sample readings, do you see how much we've mined out of like just the little bit of context we have? And how altering the question changes the context of the cards with each other. So it's like, I don't need a lot of complicated rules in my head, because I'm already getting so much by just exploring how things work together and learning about things. So my preference most of the time, if I have another core card here, is that I would say that these are two elements of the same person. And just to, without sort of belaboring it and going through, because this is already a longer video than I imagined it would be, what I get is an interesting regression in a way, but not necessarily in a bad way. So the Knight of Cups sort of becomes the Page of Wands, but I find that an interesting thing because wands are a little bit more grounded, a little bit. So I could say that like they do sort of regress a little bit, but they've actually learned more about how to manage their passions, right? So remember, I was concerned about the Wheel of Fortune distracting them from the work they need to do. Now I took the 10 of Cups away. They're not doing that. That evolution is gone. One card change changes everything about the reading. So I was worried that they were going to be a little bit distracted by the work they need to do. That may still be the case. This does not have quite the like powerful potential it did in the initial reading that I did. This one makes me think it's a little bit unknown, because this person ends up learning something new and they're looking away from my my Page of Swords here, who represents the querent, right? So they're looking toward the future and they're kind of looking away from there. So they may learn something from this person may end up learning something from this relationship, because pages are students, right? They learn things, but what they learn may be a new way to manage their passions, or it could be, and if we look at this row, that could, this ace between them creates the coins I liked at the end, because it was a very grounding thing. We're not grounded here. In fact, we have very young passion. So this person may largely still be ruled by their passions. They may learn something new. They may end up slightly more grounded, but they may sort of circle through and end up wandering and drifting away to something that keeps their passions ignited. They may not yet be capable of pulling this to fruition. So that's probably, how I would look at a situation like where I had two court cards that were upright. I would say that they just represent either an evolution or a de-evolution of a person, or different aspects of it. This card in a different position may make me think, so, again, like changing not just a card, changing the position of a card kind of changes everything. Now my reading is about, the Page of Wands. It's the center of the wheel. So this person is a thinker who's thinking primarily about this passionate, young, equally inexperienced lover, who changes like, on a dime, and who has very romantic views of the world. So, again, now everything's shifting. So this is still one person, but because it's not the last card anymore, it's not the outcome. This is like the theme of this person's world is revolving all around this somewhat changeable romantic person. And it seems like it sparks something new here for my Page of Swords. It ignites a passion, because that's how the reading ends, but it actually, there's a diminishment if I look at this row. So like their passion starts off kind of like they're really excited by this, but then it diminishes. It goes from 2 to 1. So it's like kind of a deflation. This person ends up feeling really good. They learn how sexy the mind can be. This person is diminished by how changeable passions can be. I don't think this means there's no potential, but I do think they're going to have to learn more about each other. So that's a lot. I thought, and I think it's worth summarizing all the things I said, right? So just because I do tend to ramble, and as my brain starts moving faster than my mouth does, I have to rein in the thought. So I think that this could be the first of several conversations about the courts and relationship readings. But so just to summarize some things I've said. First, I do believe in using reversals. Even if I don't, with a deck that I don't use reversals with, and I tend not to with more pictorial decks, Rider-Waite-Smithy decks, I do use reversals for the courts, especially in relationship readings or work readings. Because I want to see who is having an effect on my querent. If this were a work reading, this would be my querent. This could be someone who's slightly senior in their job, like not necessarily a boss. That would be a queen or a king, but someone who's been there a little bit longer. So I use reversals with the courts to figure out whether the court represents an aspect of my querent or someone in their life that's having an effect on them. That's the first thing. The second thing I do is I look at the cards around them to get a sense of who and what kind of experience they're having. You know what I mean? So I look at the 4 cards here. I look at the 4 cards here. And something I didn't do before, but it just seems so powerful today, was I looked at what was connecting them. So I looked at this card in relationship to them. So I look at the cards around them to get a better sense of who they are and what they're experiencing. I look at the meanings of the cards to get a sense of what kind of person they are at their core being represented. If there are more than one courts representing that person, I explore whether they're evolving or devolving or changing. If another knight had shown up here, still upright, then it would, I was in the middle of summarizing, I'm adding new to it. But then this person changes, or this person is both of these things. You know what I mean? So I look at, if there's multiple courts, what that suggests in terms of exploring, this is a very complicated person. And I like having multiple courts represent one person because it gives me more coloring. That's more interesting than if this represents a third person that's coming between them. That would only really be an option to me if they asked, how is this other person affecting our relationship? So if they said, oh, there's this other person who's trying to like wheedle their way in, then this would be a big warning sign, because they're literally between the two of them, and with a sword and a sword, there may, like, these two are sort of like, this person's watching as these two people are looking at each other. So, right? So, but again, that's the third thing. So the first thing was using reversals. The second thing is looking at the cards around them to learn more about them, and then looking at the meanings of the cards to learn more about them. The third thing was working with the other court cards that are upright or reversed to add more depth and color to an exploration of who I'm looking at. The fourth thing is working with the question to figure out the rules. So again, the question was, what's the potential of this relationship? It wasn't, how is this third person affecting this relationship? Do you know what I mean? So I try to give myself rules. When I look at the spread, and if there's a rule, if there's a situation I haven't planned for, and I realize that I have to decide if this is someone else, then I look for clues in the reading for help. Or I just decide ahead of time that no matter what, an upright card is the other person, and the reversed card is my querent, So I just decide on that. Those are the big things, those are the big ways that I work with relationships in the court cards. And then it's just about doing the reading that you always do and exploring how the rest of the cards connect them together. So, the way that, for example, this trio of cards made me feel like they're really willing to do the work, but they're still going to be distracted. You know what I mean? So in that case, you're just creating narrative from the meaning of the cards and the combinations of things that are around them. So I'm going to stop now, because I could keep talking forever and keep going on and on. But this is the kind of stuff I'm going to be adding to the Facebook group for those who are working with Tarot on Earth. And so if this rambling, sort of haphazard look into relationships in the courts is helpful, then you'll find more stuff about the courts and other ways of reading in Tarot on Earth. And you'll also find some cool people who are working with it and hanging out. So come join us. I'll put the link to buy the book on Amazon below, and the link to the Facebook group, but you have to have the book to be in the Facebook group, because it's really a study. So there'll be more sort of exclusive quote content coming specifically for that group that I'll post only in there. I'm not going to stop making normal videos for public consumption, but I am going to work with questions and stuff that come out of that group specifically for that group. So take care, be good, and I'll talk to you soon.